So the two questions this week, for whatever reason, I've had somewhat of a difficult time really answering them. So I'm just going to give you guys some of my thoughts on it, and hopefully that'll help kind of spur conversation. So the questions are: does a biblical worldview come with a set of gender roles, and in what ways should Christians and the church support or redirect efforts to center development upon gender? And so for me, breaking down just, what is a biblical worldview and gender is really helpful for me. And so a worldview is defined as how one sees and interprets the world, and biblical is just a modifier that's added to it. So it's referring to, how does Scripture really inform or undergird how we see and interpret the world. And gender, as we've been talking about, is a social construct and refers to the social definitions and expectations associated with being male or female. So it's different than sex, which is just looking at the biological and physiological differences. And there is no consensus on what a biblical worldview with respect to gender roles is. And so we all approach the biblical text from a different starting point and perspective, yet many times we don't end up with the same conclusion, especially when it comes to issues of gender. And so maybe I'm not really answering this question right, but it seems like Scripture can inform and probably should challenge our understanding of gender as a socially defined construct, but many times it does not. And so we fail to recognize that the Bible is full of truth that is applied to specific situations and specific cultural dynamics. And so the problem really lies in really looking at Scripture and reading it as detached truth. So just pulling out certain Scripture verses and without really giving any kind of respect to who the audience was, the culture. And I think we kind of get that. And so anytime we're talking about gender in Scripture, I think the way in which we approach the text, hermeneutics, is especially important. So a wrong hermeneutical approach will lead to misappropriations of Scripture and for things to just be taken wildly out of context. And I think with gender, I think it's one of the biggest things that's really taken out of context. And so I don't think you're, I guess, Mr. Kistler, I don't think you're really wanting us to debate the merits of being a Christian complementarian or egalitarian, but that's kind of where my mind goes first when I read this question. So I would love to see some other people in the pod really take a stab at this first question. So those are kind of my thoughts on the first question. And the second question kind of brings me back to some of the revelations I had from Theology of Poverty with Dr. Flett. And so I'm really glad that we've all taken Theology of Poverty, and I'm sure some of our conversations were very similar, even though we weren't taken at the same time. And one of the takeaways I had in that class was that we all have inherited quite a bit of theology, whether we realize it or not. And so without us knowing it, we've inherited quite a bit of theology, and a lot of it's bad theology. And that theology that we've inherited has a real big approach on how we implement community development. And so the example that we used often in Flett's class was asking ourselves, how much does this world matter? And, our theology really kind of dictates how we answer that question. And so if we believe that the earth is going to be annihilated and that there's going to be this, this Armageddon period and fire and all that kind of stuff is going to rain down on the earth, we're likely to view ministry as needing to be strict evangelism and strictly saving souls because, why bother doing development work if, the earth is just going to, be gone one day. So hopefully that kind of gets my point across. Hopefully you guys had that same kind of conversation in your class. And so I think with gender, I think it's likely the same thing, that we've inherited bad theology about gender without really looking at the text and drawing the truth from Scripture because we approach Scripture in the wrong way. And so I know for me, my thoughts on gender from a biblical perspective are still very underdeveloped. And even though I think even though I would cast my lot in kind of the egalitarian camp, I probably, shouldn't be the spokesperson. I probably wouldn't really be able to articulate the perspective very well, even though I think just as I've been growing as a Christian and really learning, that's just kind of how I really view it. I really view it from that perspective. And so to answer your second question a bit more directly, I think we need to develop our theology of gender because I think it'll inevitably lead to better praxis. and newfound praxis will then lead to better theology. And so I'm thinking about that cycle that Flett had of how praxis informs theology and theology informs praxis, and it's this cyclical thing. And so those are some of my thoughts. Hopefully they spur some additional thinking, and I am going to work on posting another thread with a question soon. Hopefully that's helpful. Thanks.